Conversation is timely, not only because we're concluding celebration of April as Second Chance Month, but as we begin to look back on this last year and the challenges that it's had for everyone across the board, we know that it has a specific and difficult impact for reentry. We know just from the numbers, the scope of the problem that we're trying to solve and offering second chances to our fellow Americans, that 1 in 3 Americans have a record of arrest or conviction. This is a very widespread issue. Those Americans who have a criminal record face approximately 44,000 legal barriers to successful and constructive life. And at the end of this pandemic experience, hopefully nearing the end, we are seeing tight labor markets and really challenging experiences for business owners that impact also reentry service providers. For example, we have seen that 75% of reentry service providers have temporarily limited their services, and about half of them fear a permanent end to operations. Understanding the ecosystem that's necessary to support people who are reentering their communities or looking for services as they have a criminal record, this information is so pivotal to understand as we go into this conversation ahead of us today. To get us started, I want to welcome Holly Harris. With a background in litigation, communications, and campaign strategy, Holly serves as the executive director of the Justice Action Network, where I can personally attest she is a force for smart and safe criminal justice reforms. Holly, I love to work alongside you to bring second chances to people and communities across the country. So welcome. I will turn it over to you for your remarks.
Thanks so much, Kate. It's our honor to be a sponsor of this event. And I just want to say thanks so much to Prison Fellowship for continuing to lift up the core of, what criminal justice reform, policing reform, is really all about. And it's about second chances and redemption. And these are two concepts that I think really are key to how we unify Republicans and Democrats and get folks of all ideological and political backgrounds to work together. And Second Chance Month is so beautifully timed because, we have so many states right now that are, determining whether or not they're going to move forward with criminal justice reform legislation. We just saw a big win in Tennessee, wins in Mississippi, Arizona is right there. We're right there on the cusp of some big wins in Arizona, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Washington, all of these states I think have benefited from the narrative and the really positive feelings around Second Chance Month. And I'm feeling really heartened this morning about the federal work. The president's joint address to Congress and Senator Tim Scott's rebuttal last night. And those are two inherently partisan events. And criminal justice reform and policing reform, these were, two places where it appeared that both of these leaders put partisanship aside and urged bipartisan cooperation or keeping, the conversation moving forward in the best interests of the American people. So feeling great about the federal work, specifically the Equal Act, which, Prison Fellowship and FAM and Due Process Institute and so many groups are really pivotal to moving that legislation forward and ensuring that we finally and fully eliminate the sentencing disparity between crack and cocaine, really leveling the playing field and making our justice system fairer and more effective for everyone. I'm continuously getting texts about new sponsors that are coming on board on the right, on the left, in the center. And so, again, very grateful for Second Chance Month, what it does to lift up bipartisan solutions to our country's greatest challenges. And Kate, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks so much, Holly. Now we have some ground to cover today. So next, I'd like to welcome Dr. Stephen Kull to share with us some findings on public views on reintegration and second chances. Dr. Kull is a political psychologist and director of the program for public consultation within the School of Public Policy at the University of Maryland. He also founded and serves as president of Voice of the People, a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization seeking to give the public a greater voice in government decision making. Dr. Kull, thank you for joining us today. I'm so excited to hear about your findings. And as we all know, as we work to move policy forward and advance smart solutions to offer second chances to men and women who have a criminal record, culture ultimately moves policy. And so it's so important and valuable to know what people think on these issues. So Dr. Kull, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks very much for having me. Let me just tell you a little bit about the program for public consultation. We don't take positions on public policy, except for the idea that the public should have a greater voice in public policy. What we do is we take specific policy proposals, especially pieces of legislation, and we pull out the core choice points. And we try to then create a survey that puts the respondent in the shoes of a policymaker so that they are briefed on the issue, they evaluate arguments pro and con, and then finally they give their recommendations. And we have people across the spectrum of views on these issues, review the content to make sure that the briefing is accurate and balanced, and that the arguments are the strongest ones that are being made. So one that we did that seemed to get some interest here was one on basically the negative consequences of criminal records. And I'm going to put, hope this all works out here. Here we go. Just a second. Okay, so the ideas that we had, the proposals that we explored, all arose from these pieces of legislation that many of you are probably familiar with, and then we put that together into into our survey. We fielded it with Nielsen Scarborough in February with 2,487 registered voters. Creates a small margin of error. It's weighted by age, income, and so on. And we also did an analysis where we broke the sample 6 ways based on Cook's PVI ratings for their, so that we can see what the views are from very red to very blue districts. One of the first proposals that we explored from the Next Step Act was to prohibit employers and licensing boards from rejecting a job or license applicant or terminating an employee on the basis they had been arrested but not charged, or charged but not convicted. And first of all, we asked, were you aware that people can have a criminal record when they are arrested but never charged with committing a crime? And only half of the respondents were aware of this in all categories. So the argument in favor, now I'm just going to give you a little brief summary of kind of the high point. These are the arguments are actually substantially longer than this, like 4 times longer. So, but basically the argument in favor was that an essential principle of our justice system is that people who are not proven to be guilty should not be punished. And overwhelming majorities found this a convincing argument. On the other side, it's perfectly reasonable to use an arrest record to make judgments about an applicant. And that did not do well. Only 40% found that convincing. It's not unusual, by the way, for majorities to find both the pro and the con argument convincing. So if it's below 50%, that's an argument that's not doing very well. However, 55% of Republicans did find that convincing, and more people in the very red districts found it convincing than in the very blue districts. When we finally asked them their conclusion, an overwhelming 81% favored this proposal, including 72% of Republicans, as well as 90% of Democrats. And there was very strong support in both very red and very blue districts. Breaking this out demographically, there is no demographic category that doesn't have overwhelming support, and whites are just as supportive, or in this case, slightly more supportive than Blacks and Hispanics. Another proposal is to prohibit employers and licensing boards from rejecting a job or license applicant or terminating an employee because they have been convicted for a petty nonviolent offense. This too is from the Next Step Act. And the argument in favor, disqualifying someone from a license or a job because of minor crime and their past is unjust, disproportionate, illogical. Overwhelming majorities find this convincing, very bipartisan. The counter argument that a person committed a minor crime still knowingly violated the law and is more likely to lack good judgment and be irresponsible. That does not cut it. Only 37% find that convincing, and less than half of Republicans. Their final conclusion, 8 and 10 favor this proposal, including 68% of Republicans and 89% of Democrats in very red and very blue districts. Again, all demographic categories overwhelmingly in favor. Another proposal is to prohibit employers and licensing boards from rejecting a job or license applicant or terminating an employee because of a misdemeanor and their sentence was completed 1 year ago, or a felony and their sentence was completed 5 years ago and they have not committed any crimes since. This is also part of the Next Step Act. The argument in favor, it's an essential principle of justice. The punishment should not go on indefinitely. Overwhelming majorities find this convincing. By the way, it's not always like this. It's this tremendous consensus. This is rather extraordinary, the level of consensus these issues have elicited. However, the counter argument, employers should have the right to make their own judgments about an applicant and disqualify them for criminal behavior, even if it took place well in the past. That gets some traction. 59% find that convincing, and 69% of Republicans. So that it's making some traction. Now, we tried another set of arguments. When people who have served time can't get a job, they are more likely to return to crime. This hurts everybody. Well, that does extremely well. Employers face greater liability risks when they hire someone with a criminal history. That also gets some traction, not as much, 59% overall, 70% of Republicans find that convincing. In the end, 74% favor the idea, not quite as strong as some of the other ones, and 64% of Republicans, pretty much the same in very red and very blue districts. Large majorities in all categories. Now, we wanted to look closer at this employer liability question, and saying that, that some employers have concerns about these proposals. If an employee with a criminal record commits a crime on the job, an employer can be held liable because they knowingly hired someone with a criminal record. And so the proposal is that an employer cannot be held liable. This gets overwhelming support, 78%, so that they should not be held liable. And then we took the people who had opposed this proposal for the time limits and said, well, what if there wasn't this employer liability as an issue, which, as you recall, was one of the arguments. And that picked up a number, since it's not very large to begin with, the change isn't too great, but it did increase the support to even higher levels. Another one is to prohibit housing authorities from rejecting an applicant or evicting a tenant because they've been arrested, not charged, or convicted of a minor nonviolent crime. And in the event of a felony, there would be a review board. This is in the Fair Chance at Housing Act. Argument in favor. I won't go through them in such detail. You can see them in the report. Again, overwhelming majorities find the argument in favor convincing. The argument against, that it's best to err on the side of caution and not tell housing authorities how they should do their job. Only half find that convincing, but some Republicans. In the end, 8 and 10 favor this proposal, including 70% of Republicans and 88% of Democrats. And here again, in all demographic categories. Now, another proposal, this one from the Next Step Act, is to provide people who have been arrested but not charged, or charged but not found guilty, the right to have their records sealed from the public for a minor cost. and legally they would not need to disclose their arrest or charge. And the argument in favor, there's no reason for the public to know this. Overwhelming bipartisan majority find that convincing. And then, if the person didn't do anything wrong, they can explain this to the potential employer or landlord, which is the best argument we found out there. That did not get much traction. Only 41% found that convincing, slight majority of Republicans. And in the end, 77% favored it, 70% of Republicans, 85% of Democrats, and in all demographic categories. Another proposal from the Next Step Act is to automatically seal the records of a nonviolent drug offense 5 years after the person completed the sentence. And argument in favor, overwhelmingly convincing. Argument against, that this could be risky to hire somebody like that, even if they have been caught using drugs. And only about half found that convincing, but a substantial number of Republicans, and more so in the red districts. But in the end, 3/4 favor the proposal, including 2/3 of Republicans and more than 80% of Democrats. Now, we also asked them, do you think after someone's completed their sentence for a nonviolent drug offense, they should not have to disclose it, should have to disclose it for a number of years, or should have to disclose it forever? And then they could say how many years. And the largest number said that they should have to disclose it for some period of time. But some among Democrats thought they shouldn't have to disclose it at all. So then we put that all together. And if they said should not have to disclose it at all, we counted that as 0. And then we took the others, the period of time. And so the median response is that someone should have to disclose their sentence for 3 years. Republicans, it was 5 years, and Democrats, it was 0. Just barely. Median is the person in the middle. And it was more in very red districts, they thought it should be 5, and very blue districts, they thought it should be 2. One other one comes up in a number of bills is that a person who completes their prison sentence would have their right to vote in federal elections immediately restored. The argument in favor, they shouldn't be treated like second-class citizens. It does well. The argument against, does not do well. Just 37% found that convincing. Another one that there's plenty of evidence that people with lower incomes and minorities get sent to prison much more readily than other people. 69% found that convincing, but not as many Republicans. And that the federal government should not get involved in telling states who they will let vote. About half find that convincing, but Republicans 69%. So that states' rights issue was pretty big among that group, and you can see pretty big difference between the very red and the very blue districts. So, do you favor or oppose the proposal? Overall, 69% favored it, but just under half of Republicans, 48%. In very red blue districts, it was 65%, very blue, 75%. So here we have, for the first time, a proposal that doesn't get full bipartisan support. Demographically, there is no demographic group overall that does not support the proposal, but we wanted to drill down into Republicans and who supports it, who doesn't support it. And you get some pretty interesting differences among non-white Republicans. You get 59%, while white ones, it slides under half. Women are considerably more supportive than men, and younger people are considerably more supportive than older people. Lower income people are more supportive than higher income people, and people with lower education are more supportive than people with higher education. It's unusual to find something that varies so much demographically. We also ask as another question, how acceptable the idea would be to you on a 0 to 10 scale, with 5 being just tolerable. And here you do find, because you want to know how, are people really hard set against this? And overall, 74% found it at least tolerable. And among Republicans, a modest majority, 55%, said that they would find it at least tolerable. Just one last one, prohibiting employers and licensing boards from rejecting an applicant based on a crime that is unrelated to their ability to responsibly perform the duties of the job. And that gets 3/4 support, including 2/3 of Republicans. So that ends it for me, and I will pass the ball here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kull, for underscoring for us the breadth of policy support for a culture of second chances. As I mentioned at the top, at Prison Fellowship, we really believe deeply that it matters for policy implications and for not just support of voters, but intentionality within our culture, that we know how people feel about these proposals and that we're speaking to them where they are. I should note that although particular pieces of legislation serve as the basis for the findings that have been highlighted today, panelists and participants in this event have a variety of positions on legislation generally and those that are mentioned. At Prison Fellowship, while we've not endorsed the federal legislative proposals highlighted in the study, we commend the leadership on justice reforms demonstrated by the co-sponsors, and we look forward in particular to seeing this public opinion information documented from this polling translated into constructive and good faith debate and deliberation about advancing second chances in the 117th Congress. If you're interested, just a little plug, in learning more about Prison Fellowship's specific work and our federal legislative priorities this year, please do connect with our federal legislative strategist, David Jimenez. I'm happy to enter his email in the chat so that that's accessible for each of you. But as we move this conversation forward, I wanted to welcome up Margaret DeZerga, who's the director of the Center on Sentencing and Corrections at the Vera Institute of Justice. Margaret leads Vera's work on expanding access to post-secondary education for people in prison, and she also directs a national initiative to expand access to public housing for people with conviction histories that's called Opening Doors to Public Housing. Margaret, I'm so excited to have you speak into this today, and I'm going to give you the floor for a few minutes here with a particular question or prompt before you. So, formerly incarcerated people are 10 times more likely to be homeless than the general public. And each time a formerly incarcerated person changes their residency, their chances of recidivism increase by 70%. Can you tell us, with that in mind, what you're seeing nationally about how housing authorities are thinking differently about access to public housing for people with conviction histories? Welcome, Margaret.
Thanks, Kate, and thank you for the opportunity to be with you all today. The need for housing for people with conviction histories is a really important topic. This year has shown us more than any other that having a place to call home and feel safe is critical. For many people leaving prison and jail whose families are in public housing, going home is complicated. Most housing authorities will deny somebody admission for 5 to 7 years after a conviction. I've seen some policies that specify 99 years. So essentially a lifetime ban. How do you weigh the desire to return home to the warmth and safety of your family members when doing so can put your family at risk of eviction? It's really an impossible choice. Let me tell you about someone I met in the course of doing this work with housing authorities. In New York City, Darnell's wife and 3 sons were living in public housing. He wanted nothing more than to move home to be with them after his release from prison. But since the rules did not allow that, they ended up renting him a separate room in order not to risk their housing. The resources they applied to that separate apartment clearly could have been used for other things that maybe the family would have desired. Fortunately, during that time, the New York City Housing Authority created a family reentry program that allowed Darnell to come home to be with his family. Some time has passed since he first moved in through the program, and he's since completed parole, advanced in his construction career, and was added to the lease. We had a chance to study this program, and we saw that the participants were very successful when they had supportive housing, stable housing and family support. Very few people got re-involved in the justice system. And we heard from the family members that the mutual support that they provide one another was valuable. There were grown sons helping their moms get to medical appointments, family members helping one another with job searches, and helping people meet their parole obligations. Housing authorities in other cities are interested in this approach and are adopting it to fit their context. We've had the chance to work with housing authorities and their reentry partners to launch similar programs in several cities. So right now, there's nearly 2 million people in public housing and another 5 million if we count everybody with a Section 8 voucher. Housing authorities have very broad discretion in their admissions policies. So HUD requires agencies exclude 2 kinds of convictions: somebody with a lifetime sex offense registry requirement, or somebody who is convicted of manufacturing methamphetamine in federally assisted housing. The rest are up to each of the 3,000 housing authorities to set their own policies. So most housing authorities will deny somebody for several years after release, but we know from the research that those first 90 days, that first year, is so critical to someone's successful reentry. Few people are going to be able to wait 3 years, 5 years to get into housing. This federally assisted housing must be an option for people coming home from prison or jail. Through our Opening Doors to Public Housing project, we work with housing authorities, law enforcement agencies, corrections and community corrections, reentry service providers, homeless service agencies, resident and formerly incarcerated leaders to remove barriers to housing for people with conviction histories. With support from the Department of Justice, Bureau of Justice Assistance, we've been able to help housing authorities create reentry programs like the one in New York, or change their admissions policies. And we've recently issued a set of recommendations for housing authorities on their admissions policies that draws on our experience working across 17 states. The main recommendation, if I can leave you with anyone today, would be that we want housers to conduct an individual assessment of applicants' conviction histories. This is an approach that several housing authorities have implemented, including the Housing Authority of New Orleans. So what they used to do is they would initially deny people who had a conviction for the first, 5 to 7 years post conviction or post release. There's some variation by jurisdiction. Applicants have the right to appeal a denial and bring forth mitigating evidence. But for people with a conviction who may have had a lot of doors shut in their face, they may not feel like this appeals process is really going to work in their favor. So what the Housing Authority of New Orleans has done is sort of turn the order of those events in the opposite direction. So they've narrowed the types of convictions that they're reviewing. They've narrowed the timeframes that they're going to review them. And there are certain convictions that if you have those, it's fine. It's not going to shift your admissions process. For people who do have a conviction of concern or within one of those more limited timeframes, they're going to invite applicants to come in and provide more information about their background. So talk about programs they may have completed while incarcerated, employment that they're pursuing now, family ties, other kinds of things to give a fuller picture of who this applicant is. The majority of people now going through that revised admissions process are getting in, and it only makes sense. When we know more about somebody than just the worst thing that may have happened to them, we're going to see them in that broader context and humanize them. So we're also recommending, as HUD had previously, that housing authorities discontinue the sort of one strike and you're out type policies, and that they're allowing people on probation and parole to live in public housing. If the justice system has made the determination that people can be safely in the community, then surely housing access is going to help them be safe and help them be successful. Similarly, if a judge determines someone should complete an alternative to incarceration program, that person should not lose their housing, since we know stable housing is going to be key to completing the diversion program successfully. So you may be asking yourself, like, what can you do with this information? Housing access can be a very local issue. We've seen many housing authorities get involved in this work because they're invited to join a task force to end veterans' homelessness, or somebody reaches out and invites them to join a reentry council at the city or county level. Those kinds of opportunities will help open conversations with housing authorities and connect them to reentry service providers. At the state level, a law was recently passed in Illinois that requires all the state housing authorities to limit look-back periods to the 6 months prior to somebody's housing application. And that's the first of its kind in the country, as far as I know. There are also jurisdictions that have passed fair chance housing ordinances, sort of similar to some ban-the-box type legislation we've seen, that narrow the type of background checks landlords can conduct. And some of them tie those provisions to the type of funding that you might be getting. So if you're getting funding from the state to build housing, then this is going to be something you're going to comply with. So Kate, I want to thank you for the chance to share some of the great work happening with housing authorities. They are committed to providing a second chance at housing, and I'm hopeful that we'll see other landlords, including private landlords and different kinds of housing funding, follow suit to really make this a reality for people.
Thanks so much, Margaret, for your thoughtful update on the status of housing access for men and women with a criminal record across the country. At Prison Fellowship, this is something that we deeply believe in and have been taking up in states like Oklahoma, where access to public housing has a really strong tie to someone's specific criminal record. So really grateful for your work. And I just want to flag for the attendees as we continue on with our panel that if you have questions in your mind as you're taking in this information, please enter them in the chat. That will help us move through a Q&A time at the end of this time of sharing. And if we have answers to those panelists, you're welcome to answer Q&A through the chat box as they come in, if that's easier as well. So thank you, Margaret. Our next speaker is Jerry Blassengame. Jerry is the Executive Director of Soteria Community Development Corporation, and he endeavors to empower individuals and the community through education, affordable housing, financial literacy, community and economic development, and entrepreneurship. Jerry's passion is assisting people who've been incarcerated through reentry and helping them to become productive citizens. And Jerry has been a powerful voice for this in partnership with Prison Fellowship in many occasions in the past. Jerry, I'm so glad you're here. And as I turn it over to you to share for a few minutes, I want to do that with two questions primarily in mind. So first, what challenges face formerly incarcerated people specifically during this pandemic season and its economic and public health fallout? And second, how has Soteria, and you specifically in your work there, come alongside returning citizens in South Carolina during this unprecedented moment? So Jerry, I'll turn it over to you.
Kate, thank you so much. And Margaret, thank you also for your awesome comments. And that's one of the first things, things, even before the pandemic, we had problems with housing with people who are previously incarcerated. And so we look at things like housing, education, employment. These are big things that even before the pandemic, people who were formerly incarcerated already were having issues with. And now we put the pandemic on top of that. It was just a lot for people who were already trying to survive to, put on top of that. And so we run a reentry services and also reentry doing community and economic development. So 20 years ago, when I started Soteria, we could not find any resources for reentry back in the day. So I used all the components of community and economic development. And so we've been able to help a lot of people with housing and employment and education, but the pandemic brought a lot with businesses closing, especially in the hospitality industry, because a lot of people with criminal backgrounds where I live, that's where we can find a lot of jobs in the hospitality industry. So when restaurants closed and people couldn't get in hotels, a lot of people lost their jobs. And already with, education, with schools closing down, people could not, get to school. But we run a transitional housing services for people who are leaving prison and getting out and coming to society. So you can look at those with prisons closing down, with people not being able to go to work inside of the prisons. My staff could not communicate with some of the people in reentry services in the prisons. So it was hard for us to communicate with men who were planning to come to our program. And so it was hard for us to get guys, and guys would say they were on their way, and it was just a lot. They never showed up. So it was a lot. And then when it comes to getting PPE equipment to those who were previously incarcerated, who were not, plugged into the system. So we had so many communication issues. As you can imagine, with those who are previously incarcerated. But being a community-minded person, us being right in the middle of the community, we had to figure out resources. What can we do? So one of the things we did is during the pandemic is we were able every other week was give groceries to people who are previously incarcerated, people who lived in our transitional houses, people who lived in our 14 low-income rentals in our surrounding area. We would purchase groceries from another nonprofit who brought food into our community, and we were giving out food boxes. Not only were we giving out food boxes to people in the neighborhood who had lost their jobs or just didn't have enough food, we were also putting PPE equipment in those boxes just to make sure that everybody had the proper things, they needed. So you can imagine with prisons letting people out, the pandemic hit the prisons. So people who were coming to our organization or other organizations, some of them had already been exposed to COVID. And so we were making sure that our guys did not get infected. So within Soteria, what we did is we made sure all of our guys got tested, and we went through a round of testing. I think guys probably got 5 or 6 rounds of testing, during the year, and which was pretty cumbersome for them, but not only them, but our staff got tested. And we are asking everybody that come to our transitional house to get a test before they come. If the prison cannot test them, we will set them up a test before they get out. And within the first week, we try to get them tested. Now that vaccinations are out, we are requiring that everybody get vaccinated. So our whole staff is vaccinated. We've got both our shots, and also everybody who live in our transitional house, we've also got them vaccinated. And also we had 2 people that just got released last month, and they have already received their first shot. And so we're asking that everybody come into our organization, get vaccinated so that we can slow the spread of COVID. So these are some of the creative and innovative things that we're doing, being a voice in the community as a reentry service provider, and now being right in the middle of a low-income community. We are the voice, we're the catch-all. And so we're trying to make sure that people who are previously incarcerated not only get out and try to live a life, but stay safe and educate them. We're working with DHEC, our local state health authorities, to make sure that we get training out to people. We volunteered our office as a site for training. And right now, my director of operations is working with our state DHEC to also make sure that if they need a site for vaccinations or pop-up vaccines, we can be a site. And so we're doing things that's not in our wheelhouse, because we want to make sure that people who are previously incarcerated get the tools and get the education and healthcare and things that they need, so that they can get out and feel safe. So many people were not wanting to come to transitional houses or be inside transitional houses because of the just the risk of 14 or 15 people being in one location. So we're trying to make it safe for everybody, and make sure that people will feel like, this is a safe place for them to come to, not only in our transitional house, but in the community as a whole. So we're very thankful for the resources that we have here at Soteria, and thankful for what you all do, everybody on this Zoom event here. And thank you, Prison Fellowship. And Kate, thank you for moderating this great panel. So I'm going to land this plane, and I'll wait for some more questions at Q&A. So thank y'all for having me.
Thanks so much, Jerry, and great flag for the Q&A. With the group assembled here, it's such a great opportunity to ask questions and draw on their knowledge and experience. So we'd love to see those questions come in. I have some questions of my own brewing for each of you as you talk. But Jerry, reentry service providers like Soteria play such a critical role coming alongside people with a criminal record, and really appreciate your remarks today. This is one reason why Prison Fellowship was proud to be a key partner in the initial passage and reauthorization of the Second Chance Act, which of course provides federal dollars to reentry service providers across the nation. Robust funding of this grant program in each appropriation cycle is a continued priority of ours. And as we think through how to offer access to second chances to men and women with a criminal record, I want to welcome Dr. Greg Majette to the screen. Dr. Greg is an assistant professor of criminology and criminal justice at the University of Maryland. If my husband were here, I know he would be shouting "Go Terps" in the background. He received his PhD from the Pardee Rand Graduate School and MPP from UCLA. He was previously a policy researcher at the Rand Corporation and specializes in program evaluation, policy analysis, and empirical research methods. His work focuses on alcohol and drugs, illicit markets, community corrections, and the impact of public safety policies and practices on public health, and the influence of policy design on disparities. So really helpful to our conversation today and to the policymaking process. Now, Greg, as we dive into your segment, I wanted to tee up a question for you. So too often, success in community corrections is a little bit elusive for people with a criminal record, especially following what Jerry shared about the personal experiences of people who he interacts with during this specific phase of American history. We know that this is a need. And for instance, in 2017, we saw that 45% of state prison admissions were associated with a technical violation or the commitment of a new crime during that period of probation or parole. Can you share with us the success of the 24/7 sobriety project in South Dakota and any insights that that experience might offer for innovation across the community correction system?
Yeah, of course, I'd be happy to. Thank you so much for inviting me, and it's an honor and a privilege to be part of this. So I'm going to share our research on the South Dakota's innovative 24/7 sobriety program. But for a bit of context, each year about 1 million drunk driving arrests are made nationwide. And drug and alcohol abuse and dependence have, for a long time, been linked to criminal justice involvement beyond drunk driving. I'm really excited to discuss new approaches to community supervision and support, especially those that promote accountability between the community and individuals, and programs that give justice-involved individuals an opportunity to remain in the community. My work with Rand colleagues on 24/7 started about a decade ago, so long before I moved to Maryland and appreciated Big Ten basketball and football. Our research has involved not only measuring the efficacy of the program in South Dakota and other states, but also field observations and talking with those who operate these programs throughout the country. The origin of 24/7 is probably worth noting very quickly. A judge in South Dakota named Larry Long wanted to solve what he viewed as a practical problem. He repeatedly saw the same group of people in court on Monday because they drove drunk over the weekend. The existing policy to deter drunk driving in South Dakota just wasn't working, in his view. So he thought if he could deter drinking, people couldn't drive drunk. So he came up with a program with 3 major components. 1, order an individual to abstain from alcohol. 2, frequent alcohol testing. And then 3, swift, certain, and very modest sanctions for violation of the order not to drink. And so when the program was first piloted in South Dakota in 2005, those who were arrested for repeat drunk driving had to abstain from alcohol and participate as a condition of bond. Participants would go into the sheriff's office twice a day, every day, and blow into a breathalyzer. To reduce the risk of false positives, those that tested positive once were tested again 15 minutes later, and if they failed that retest, they were immediately taken to jail, where they'd spend a night or 2. So it's punitive. But it was very different from the typical practice of ordering individuals to abstain from alcohol, but testing them irregularly, if at all. Instead, laws relied on threats of really, really heavy fines, longer stays in jail, and other penalties if someone got caught driving drunk or committed some other type of crime and was convicted that was associated with drug or alcohol use. 24/7 sobriety appeared to be creating a credible deterrent threat and holding participants accountable for their behavior while they remain in the community. And participants overwhelmingly showed up and tested clean. No-shows and failed tests were very uncommon, which was unexpected and is still surprising as a researcher that's been studying it for a decade. Judges soon started ordering people arrested or convicted for other offenses, for example, people arrested for domestic violence, to the program. And 24/7 began to spread to other counties throughout the state by word of mouth. By offense type, but offense type and geography were not the only ways the program was expanding. It grew from a pretrial assignment program to integrate participation after conviction and release. And some participants began wearing monitoring bracelets that test their sweat every 30 minutes for alcohol, instead of blowing into a breathalyzer twice daily. And they also piloted supervision using automobile ignition interlock and handheld portable breathalyzers possessed by participants rather than a justice agency. In addition, participants at risk of using drugs other than alcohol are now tested and sanctioned when the use is evident. So it's expanded beyond drunk driving and expanded beyond alcohol alone. From 2005 through today, approximately 50,000 South Dakotans in the program accumulated nearly 8 million days without a detected alcohol violation, indicating a drastic reduction in drinking among a population of individuals where drinking had gotten them into trouble. Of nearly 12 million breathalyzer tests that were ordered, 98.9% have been clean. RAND research published in the American Journal of Public Health showed that when counties adopted the program in South Dakota, the total number of arrests for repeat drunk driving fell by 12% at the county level. In addition, implementation of 24/7 was associated with a 9% reduction in domestic violence arrests. And keep in mind, the program was not intended to address domestic violence initially. At the individual level, among people arrested for their second or third drunk driving offense, the program reduces the likelihood of rearrest for drunk driving by almost 50% after a year and about 25% after 3 years. So evidence suggests that the program can be adapted to work outside of South Dakota as well. In recent separate analyses, we found the program generated similar reductions in drunk driving in North Dakota and Montana. There remain yet to be answered questions about the program that are extremely important to both jurisdictions and participants. Like, what will we do with this information, with this promising program? How does a program that seems to work well in Montana and the Dakotas translate to other states? What's the minimum sanction required to provide a credible deterrent to getting drunk? And can positive incentives be integrated to improve effectiveness? Further, how can substance abuse treatment or substance misuse treatment, counseling, or other services offered in a state or a local community best be combined with the program? Some jurisdictions already mandate training or treatment along with being in the program, but to date, most don't. Others also have begun to integrate 24/7 testing or this testing regimen and sanctions with their drug and DUI court programs. The specific implementation choices that policymakers, judges, and other members of the justice system make based on their knowledge of the communities they serve can maximize the program's effectiveness. When integrated into an area's existing criminal justice system and carried out with fidelity, 24/7 sobriety is a promising way to reduce alcohol-involved crimes such as drunk driving and improve public health and safety while keeping people in the community. Again, thank you so much for arranging this and allowing me to be part of it. I'm happy to answer questions when Q&A session pops up.
Thank you so much, Greg. That is always so interesting to see how states are tackling these issues and being innovative, certainly with implications for the jurisdictions around them and the federal government. So speaking of states, I wanted to introduce Lauren. Lauren Krasai is a senior policy analyst at the Justice Action Network, focusing on their expanding state work. So previously, Lauren served as the Director of Criminal Justice Reform at Reason Foundation, where she managed comprehensive state-level criminal justice reform initiatives, authored and oversaw various research projects, and organized innovative events and activities. Lauren, so glad to have you with us today. And to guide your remarks to close out our session, I want to just give you this one key question. So we saw historic bipartisan First Step Act legislation emerge out of the reform successes, really, of a wide number of state governments in the past decade. We've seen this in Texas, we've seen it in Louisiana, we've seen it all over the place, sometimes in unlikely states, right? So what recent policy victories in the second chance area should Hill staff be aware of today? And thank you, Lauren. I'll turn it to you.
Thanks, Kate, and I'm very happy to be here among such esteemed panelists. So thanks so much for having me. Yeah, today I'm just going to talk about some reforms that are focused on reentry in some of the states that Jan has worked in. These are not, this is not a comprehensive list of all of the reentry bills that have passed this year. But it just goes to show, like, this is a pretty good list that I'm about to present, but it just goes to show that the states are really leading, I think, on this issue. And we're happy to see such a wide range of bills passing in red and blue and purple states across the country. So a couple that I want to highlight, one that I'm very excited about is a bill in Arizona, actually, a state not necessarily known for its criminal justice reforms, but a state that recently passed a driver's license suspension reform. So this is a really important bill that eliminates the ability to suspend a person's license for failure to pay traffic tickets. Now, often when a person has their is unable to pay they ran a red light, or they have a parking ticket and they're unable to pay, they'll automatically have that license suspended. And if they get pulled over, of course, it starts their integration in the criminal justice system and leads to all sort of negative consequences. And so this bill prohibits the ability to suspend a driver's license for those narrow offenses, and it also retroactively reinstates licenses of those who have had their licenses suspended for that reason. And it's estimated that it's going to impact roughly 30,000 Arizonans. So this is a really important bill. Governor Ducey recently signed it, and we're very, very excited to have helped to work on that one. In Arkansas, there's a couple of bills that are still pending, but are looking pretty good. So I just want to highlight a couple of those. Similar to Arizona's bill, there's Senate Bill 513, which would eliminate failure to pay or suspensions for failure to pay, driver's license suspensions. There's another issue that's gaining steam across the country over the last few years, and that's expungement reform. So there's a bill in Arkansas that would expand expungement. It would allow for expungements of individuals who are incarcerated and allow for expungements for offenses committed prior to 2013, which is currently not allowed. And then there's a separate expungement bill, House Bill 1329, that will make it easier to seal misdemeanor drug convictions, which really allows individuals to have that true second chance and not be labeled forever by their past mistakes. Another issue, another state, New Mexico, that we're very excited about is a bill that passed. It was actually a part of the marijuana legalization that they did out there. It was combined, so it didn't get as much attention, but it's one that I'm very excited about. It's occupational licensing reform. It prohibits occupational licensing boards from denying a person's application for a license based on their criminal history if it's unrelated to the occupation for which the license is sought. And they also eliminate vague terms like crimes of moral turpitude, which I still don't know what that means. And so they eliminate the ability to suspend or to deny somebody a license for if they've committed a crime of moral turpitude, for example, as well. Oklahoma, Kate, I know this is very close to your heart, this state reforms that are happening there. There was a bill that was just signed, I believe it was last week, called the Sarah Stitt Act, named after the governor's, or the first lady, the governor's wife, that I think is a very crucial bill that doesn't get a lot of attention. It basically requires the department to hand out all sorts of identification to an individual who is reentering society. So often folks who are locked up, they go to prison, they may not have access to the documents that they need, to get a driver's license, to apply for employment or housing. So this bill requires that an individual, when they leave prison, they have a state ID if they're not eligible for a driver's license, or they have that updated driver's license if they had one before they went in, a social security card, and a birth certificate. It also requires the department to conduct at least one job interview with the person before they leave. And so it really kind of equips the person with all the things that they need to successfully reenter and have these documents, because it is really hard to get these documents. I mean, it was hard for me to get the real ID, let's be real here. So I think for somebody who's leaving incarceration who doesn't have these documents, it's much more difficult to reenter society and just do these basic type of things if they don't have these documents. So I'm very excited about that bill, and I'm glad that it was signed into law. And there was also driver's license suspension reform in Oklahoma. It's kind of a fad these days. But this bill was limited to, it eliminated the ability to suspend a license for drug convictions. So in Oklahoma, that was a routine thing for a misdemeanor drug possession offense. You could have your license suspended. And so they eliminated the ability to do that, which will greatly benefit, I think, citizens of that state. And finally, I mean, there's a couple other states, but I know we're running short on time. And so I just wanted to highlight one more state. These just passed yesterday. In Tennessee, Governor Bill Lee has been a really strong champion for second chances and just criminal justice reform. And he had two bills that were kind of touch points of his administration. They're House Bills 784 and 785. That were primarily focused on reentry and kind of creating more holistic criminal justice reform. And so some of the things that were included in these bills, they were pretty long bills, pretty comprehensive, but just the reentry components. There was some occupational licensing reform, driver's license suspension reform, better access to services on reentry. It created a system of graduated sanctions for technical violations, which means, you know, people aren't going to be sent back to prison for a first technical mistake. It also increased funding for programming partnerships with the private sector. The programming opportunities in Tennessee prisons are actually really great. And so this kind of creates the ability to work with these private companies in the communities and pair them with the corrections facilities so that there's kind of a connection there between folks who are reentering society and are looking for employment and employers who are looking for employees. So we're very excited about this one. There's also a separate bill that is sponsored by Representative Curcio around expungement that is making its way through the process that will probably pass here in the next week or so, that we're also very excited about. So anyway, as you can see, I can talk about these reforms all day long, and there are actually a few more states on my list that I could get to if I had all the time in the world, but I will hand it back to Kate, and I'm looking forward to any questions that anyone might have. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Lauren. Man, I love to think about the implications of state policy for not just the surrounding jurisdictions and regions or similarly situated states, but also for federal policymaking, what lessons can be learned from that. And if anything, Lauren, I think your conversation really draws out how fundamental these questions are, right? We're talking, when we talk about second chances, of things sometimes as basic as access to an ID, access to drive, access to employment, access to education, and those things that so many people who do not bear a criminal record take for granted, and we all consider steps towards success. So we are almost over time, so I'm actually not going to open it up for questions today, but I do want to ask that all of our panelists just drop your information in the chat box so that attendees can reach out to you personally if they have questions about your remarks or about your work. And I want to give a big thank you to every one of our panelists. You know, Holly, Stephen, Margaret, Jerry, Greg, Lauren, thank you for leveraging your knowledge, your experience to make this conversation meaningful for policymakers, staff, and other advocates who are attending today. And I want to give a quick plug. I mentioned at the top of this time together that this month, April, is celebrated as Second Chance Month. And for several years now, people from all across the country, across partisan lines, different belief systems, you name it, different experiences have joined together to celebrate April as Second Chance Month. And we are capping off this year's Second Chance Month celebration with our annual gala tonight. So if you are interested in joining virtually, I just want to share with you that information. We will drop the link in the chat, but tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern, we are hosting a virtual gala featuring Brian Stevenson, Lecrae, many others. So really would love for you to join us for that and to cap off the celebration together. So again, big thank you to our panelists today for giving up your time and your experience. And we look forward to coming back together to bring second chances to those around us. Thanks so much, y'all. Happy Second Chance Month.